Hello, how are you today? And are you ready to hear mysteries? If you're ready, I'll tell you.
The Haunted Road Home. Captain John had seen many things during his time in the military. After serving for over a decade, he was finally returning to his hometown, a small rural village he hadn't visited in years. The thought of reuniting with his family filled him with a mix of excitement and trepidation. The journey home was supposed to be a peaceful retreat from the horrors of war, but as he drove through the winding country roads, he felt an unsettling chill in the air. The sun was setting as he left the main highway and entered the familiar yet changed landscape of his childhood. The roads were narrower, the trees denser, and an eerie silence hung in the air. John glanced at the old map his father had given him, hoping it would guide him through the unfamiliar terrain. The GPS on his phone was unreliable in this remote area, flickering in and out of service. As darkness fell, John noticed the first signs of something amiss. The headlights of his car caught glimpses of shadows moving in the trees. At first, he dismissed them as animals, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger. His instincts, honed by years of combat, told him something was wrong. He reached a dilapidated bridge that he didn't remember from his childhood. The wooden planks creaked under the weight of his car, and as he crossed, he saw the figure of a man standing at the other end. The man wore old, tattered clothes and stared at John with hollow eyes. John slowed down, rolling down his window. "Need a lift?" he asked, but the man didn't respond. Instead, he vanished into the mist as John drove past. The bridge groaned behind him, as if relieved of a great weight. John's thoughts drifted back to his time in the service. He had lost many comrades, and the memories of battle haunted him. As he drove, the road seemed to twist and turn unnaturally, leading him deeper into the woods. He saw more figures at the roadside, soldiers in uniform, their faces contorted in pain and fear. They reached out to him, but when he blinked, they were gone. The radio crackled to life, playing an old wartime song that sent shivers down his spine. He tried to change the station, but the knob wouldn't turn. The song continued, its haunting melody filling the car. Further down the road, John saw a convoy of military vehicles ahead. He honked his horn, hoping to join them, but as he approached, the vehicles faded into the fog. Confused and disoriented, he stopped his car and stepped out, calling out to the phantom soldiers. The air was thick with tension, and he felt a presence behind him. Turning quickly, he saw a young soldier, no older than 18, standing beside his car. The soldier's uniform was from an older era, and his eyes were filled with sorrow. "Captain, you must turn back," the soldier said, his voice echoing in the stillness. "This road is not safe." John blinked, and the soldier was gone. His heart pounded as he got back into the car, his mind racing with questions. He knew he had to keep going, but the warnings gnawed at him. As he drove on, the road became more treacherous. The fog thickened, and strange noises filled the air, whispers, cries, and the distant sound of gunfire. He saw the ruins of an old farmhouse, its windows shattered and its walls covered in vines. A figure stood in the doorway, a woman in a white dress, her eyes wide with terror. John stopped the car and got out, approaching the woman cautiously. "Are you all right?" he asked, but she didn't respond. Instead, she pointed to the road behind him. "Turn back," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They won't let you leave." He turned to look, but there was nothing there. When he turned back, the woman was gone. Fear gripped him, but he pushed on, determined to reach his family. The road led him to another bridge, this one covered in mist. As he crossed, he saw figures emerging from the fog, soldiers, civilians, and children, all staring at him with hollow eyes. They reached out to him, their voices a cacophony of pleas and warnings. "Turn back. Help us. Don't go on." John's hands trembled on the steering wheel, but he couldn't stop. He pressed the gas pedal, driving through the mist and emerging on the other side. The figures disappeared, but their voices lingered in his mind. The road straightened out, and he saw the familiar sights of his hometown in the distance. Relief washed over him, but it was short-lived. A figure appeared in the middle of the road, forcing him to swerve. The car skidded off the road, crashing into a ditch. John struggled to get out, his body aching from the impact. As he crawled out of the car, he saw the figure standing nearby, a woman in a black dress, her eyes filled with sorrow. "You can't escape them," she said, her voice like a distant echo. "They will follow you." He staggered to his feet, determined to make it home. The road ahead was clear, but the sense of being watched never left him. He walked the remaining distance, each step heavy with fear and exhaustion. As dawn broke, John reached his family's house. His parents rushed out to greet him, their faces etched with worry and relief. "John, what happened? We were so worried," his mother exclaimed, hugging him tightly. He tried to explain, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he embraced his family, the warmth of home a stark contrast to the cold fear of the night. As he settled in, the memories of the journey haunted him. The voices, the figures, and the warnings replayed in his mind. He had made it home, but he knew the road would never let him forget. The haunted road had claimed many before him, and its grip was strong. John vowed never to travel it again, but deep down, he knew the ghosts of the past would always be with him, a reminder of the journey that brought him home. The long road home. After a decade of living in the city, Emma finally had a break from her hectic life. Nostalgia tugged at her heart as she packed her bags for a trip back to her childhood home, a small rural town she hadn't visited in 10 years. The excitement of reuniting with her family filled her with warmth as she imagined her parents' smiling faces and the comforting embrace of home. The road had changed since she last traveled it. What was once a familiar route had transformed, with new buildings and roads replacing the old. As she left the city behind, the landscape gradually shifted to the vast, empty expanses of the countryside. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting eerie shadows that danced along the deserted highway. Emma's sense of excitement began to wane as the surroundings grew more unfamiliar and unsettling. She glanced at the map on her phone, reassuring herself that she was on the right path. The GPS signal flickered, then disappeared, leaving her with nothing but the dark, winding road ahead. A dense fog rolled in, reducing visibility to a few feet in front of her car. She slowed down, squinting into the mist. Her heart raced as she saw the silhouette of a figure standing by the roadside. As she got closer, the figure vanished, leaving her to question whether it was real or a trick of her mind. She pressed on, her grip tightening on the steering wheel. The radio, once playing a cheerful tune, crackled with static before switching to a low, haunting melody. Emma reached to turn it off, but the knob wouldn't budge. Unease settled in her stomach as the eerie music continued to fill the car. Further down the road, she encountered an old, dilapidated gas station. A sense of dread washed over her, but she needed to refuel. As she pulled in, she noticed the place was deserted, save for an old man sitting on a rocking chair, staring into the distance. "Excuse me, is the pump working?" she asked, but the man didn't respond. His eyes were vacant, his face expressionless. Emma quickly filled her tank, paid at the pump, and drove off, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. As the fog thickened, she saw the outline of a car wreck on the side of the road. Her heart pounded as she approached, seeing a woman in tattered clothes standing next to it, waving frantically. Emma slowed down, but as she rolled down her window to offer help, the woman disappeared. The car wreck was old, covered in rust and vines, as if it had been there for years. Emma's fear escalated with each mile. Shadows flickered at the edge of her vision, and she heard whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. She thought of her family, the warmth of home, and pressed on, determined to reach her destination. Suddenly, her car jolted as if it had hit something. She stopped and got out to inspect, but there was nothing on the road. Confused and frightened, she hurried back into the car and locked the doors. Further along, she came upon a crossroad with a single, flickering street light. Underneath it stood a young girl, her eyes wide with terror. Emma stopped and rolled down her window. "Are you lost?" she asked. The girl stared at her, tears streaming down her face. "Don't go this way. They won't let you leave." Before Emma could respond, the girl vanished into thin air. Panic set in, and Emma sped away, not daring to look back. The road twisted and turned, leading her through dense forests and abandoned farms. She saw more apparitions. A man limping along the roadside, a child crying in the bushes, and a woman clutching her head in agony. Each one disappeared as she approached, leaving her more terrified. She checked the time. It was well past midnight. Her car's clock blinked erratically, and her phone was dead. The road seemed endless, stretching into the darkness. As dawn approached, the fog lifted, revealing the familiar landmarks of her hometown. Emma's fear began to fade, replaced by relief. She turned onto her parents' street, tears of joy and exhaustion streaming down her face. Her parents rushed out to greet her, their worried expressions turning to joy. "We were so worried about you," her mother exclaimed, hugging her tightly. "You took the old road, didn't you? They say it's haunted." Emma nodded, too exhausted to speak. As she stepped inside, the warmth of home enveloped her, chasing away the lingering shadows of the night. She had made it, but the journey would haunt her memories forever. The Phantom of Willow Creek Road. Officer James Carter had been patrolling the rural roads of Pine Hill County for over a decade. It was a quiet, uneventful job most of the time, with the occasional speeding ticket or a call to help a stranded driver. But there was one stretch of road that every officer in the department spoke about in hushed tones: Willow Creek Road. It was a desolate, winding road that cut through dense forests and rolling hills. The locals avoided it, preferring longer routes to their destinations. Rumors had circulated for years about strange occurrences and eerie sightings, but James had always dismissed them as superstitions and old wives' tales. One foggy night, James was assigned the late shift. As he drove along the darkened roads, the radio crackled to life. "All units, we have reports of a stranded vehicle on Willow Creek Road. Please respond." James sighed and turned onto the narrow, winding road. The fog was thick, reducing visibility to just a few feet. His headlights barely pierced the murk, casting long shadows that danced ominously on the trees. After driving for several miles, he spotted a car parked on the shoulder. Its hazard lights were blinking weakly. James pulled over and approached the vehicle, flashlight in hand. The car was empty, but the driver's door was open, and there were no signs of anyone nearby. "Dispatch, this is Officer Carter. I've located the vehicle, but there's no one here." "I'll investigate the area," he reported. As he scanned the surroundings, a chill ran down his spine. The air grew colder, and the silence was deafening. James ventured into the woods, calling out, "Hello. Is anyone there?" Suddenly, he heard a faint sobbing sound. He followed it, his flashlight beam cutting through the fog. Ahead, he saw a figure, a young woman in a white dress, her hair disheveled and her face pale. "Mum, are you all right?" James asked, approaching cautiously. The woman looked up, her eyes filled with despair. "Please, help me. I need to get home." James felt a pang of sympathy. "Of course, where do you live?" She pointed down the road. "Just a little further, I'll show you." He escorted her back to his patrol car, noting how cold her hand felt when she briefly touched his arm. They drove in silence, the fog swirling around them like a shroud. "What's your name?" James asked. "Emily," she replied softly. As they drove, James noticed the road ahead seemed to stretch endlessly. He glanced at Emily, but she was staring straight ahead, her expression blank. After what felt like an eternity, Emily spoke again. "This is where I live. You can let me out here." James pulled over and watched as she stepped out of the car and walked towards an old, abandoned house. As she reached the porch, she turned and smiled softly at him. "Thank you, Officer Carter." He nodded, feeling uneasy. "Stay safe, Emily." As he drove away, he radioed in, "Dispatch, I've assisted the stranded motorist, heading back to the station now." "Roger that, Carter, good work," the dispatcher replied. The next day, James couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He decided to look up the address Emily had given him. His heart skipped a beat when he found an old newspaper article detailing a tragic accident that had occurred on Willow Creek Road 5 years earlier. A young woman named Emily Turner had died in a car crash, her body found near the very house he had taken her to. James's blood ran cold as he realized that the Emily he had met was the same Emily who had died years ago. He had encountered a ghost. Determined to find out more, he visited the local historical society and spoke to Mrs. Avery, the town historian. She confirmed the story, adding that Emily's spirit was said to haunt the road, seeking help to find her way home. Some say she's looking for closure. Others believe she can't rest until someone understands her sorrow, Mrs. Avery explained. James was deeply unsettled, but also felt a sense of responsibility. He decided to visit Emily's grave, hoping to find some way to help her spirit move on. That night, James returned to Willow Creek Road, parking near the spot where he had first seen Emily. He walked to the old house, the fog thick around him, and called out, "Emily, are you here?" The air grew colder, and Emily's figure appeared on the porch, just as before. "Why have you come back?" she asked, her voice echoing in the stillness. "I want to help you find peace," James replied, his voice steady despite the fear gripping him. Emily's eyes softened, and she stepped closer. "I never meant to cause harm. I just want to go home." James nodded. "I know." "Let's do this together." They walked to her grave, and James placed flowers on the headstone. He said a prayer for her, asking for her soul to find rest. As he finished, Emily's figure began to fade, a look of gratitude on her face. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. James watched as she disappeared, the fog lifting and the night air growing warmer. He felt a sense of calm wash over him, knowing he had helped her finally find peace. From that night on, Willow Creek Road was just another quiet, rural road. The haunting presence was gone, and the locals no longer avoided it. Officer James Carter continued his patrols, but he never forgot the encounter with the ghost of Emily Turner and the lesson it taught him about compassion, understanding, and the mysteries that sometimes linger just beyond our understanding. The Unseen Passenger. Emma and Alex loved exploring the unknown. They thrived on the thrill of the road, the promise of hidden gifts, and the stories whispered by forgotten places. This summer, they decided to take a road trip through America, choosing their destinations on a whim, guided only by their sense of adventure. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, they found themselves on a lonely stretch of road cutting through dense forest. The map indicated a small town just ahead, but the road seemed deserted, shrouded in the eerie glow of twilight. "Let's keep going. We'll find a place to stay in the next town," Alex suggested, his eyes scanning the road ahead. Emma nodded, turning up the volume on their favorite playlist. The familiar tunes filled the car, momentarily dispelling the creeping sense of unease that had settled over them. Minutes turned into an hour, and the road remained empty. The dense trees on either side seemed to close in on them, casting long, twisted shadows. The GPS signal flickered and died, leaving them with no choice but to continue forward. Suddenly, the car's headlights illuminated a figure standing by the roadside. It was a young woman, dressed in an old-fashioned dress, her pale face illuminated in the headlights' glare. She raised her hand in a silent plea for help. Alex slowed the car and glanced at Emma. "Should we stop?" Emma hesitated, a chill running down her spine. "I don't know ... something feels off." But Alex, ever the good Samaritan, had already pulled over. The woman approached, her movements unnaturally smooth. As she reached the car, Emma rolled down her window slightly. "Do you need help?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. The woman nodded. "Please, I need to get to the next town. Can you give me a ride?" Despite her reservations, Emma agreed. The woman climbed into the back seat, her presence filling the car with an inexplicable cold. As they resumed their journey, Emma tried to make conversation, but the woman remained silent, staring out the window. The car's atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive, the air thick with tension. Out of the corner of her eye, Emma noticed the woman's reflection in the rearview mirror. Her eyes were hollow, devoid of any light. Emma's heart raced, and she glanced at Alex, who seemed oblivious to the growing sense of dread. Suddenly, the woman spoke, her voice a whisper that seemed to echo in Emma's mind. "There's a turn ahead. Take it." Without questioning, Alex complied. The road twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the forest. The trees seemed to close in, their branches clawing at the car like skeletal fingers. Finally, they emerged into a small clearing, a dilapidated house standing at its center. The woman got out, her movements still eerily smooth. "Thank you," she said, her voice carrying an unsettling finality. Before Emma could respond, the woman disappeared into the shadows. Alex turned the car around, eager to leave the clearing. As they sped away, Emma felt a strange pull, as if the place was trying to draw them back. They reached the next town without incident and found a motel for the night. As they settled in, Emma couldn't shake the feeling of unease. She checked her phone, finally finding a signal. Curiosity gnawed at her, and she searched for any information about the area. Her blood ran cold as she read about a young woman who had died in a car accident on that very road, decades ago. It was said that her spirit lingered, seeking help from passing travelers, leading them to a place from which they might never return. Emma showed the article to Alex, who paled. "Do you think?" Emma nodded, unable to finish the thought. They had narrowly escaped a sinister fate, but the encounter left them both shaken, their love for adventure tainted by a brush with the supernatural. Despite their unsettling experience, Emma and Alex continued their journey, determined not to let fear ruin their trip. They planned their next destination carefully, avoiding isolated roads and researching each town in advance. A few days later, they found themselves in a quaint, picturesque town nestled in the mountains. The locals were friendly, the scenery breathtaking, and they quickly found a charming motel to stay in. The motel, a relic from the 1950s, had been lovingly maintained, its retro charm attracting tourists. The owner, an elderly woman named Mrs. Turner, welcomed them warmly. "You'll love it here," Mrs. Turner said, handing them the keys to room 13. "Just let me know if you need anything." Emma felt a slight twinge of apprehension at the room number, but brushed it off. They unpacked and decided to explore the town. The day passed pleasantly, and by evening, they were back at the motel, ready to relax. As they settled in for the night, strange noises began to disrupt their peace. Soft whispers echoed through the walls, and the faint sound of footsteps seemed to come from the hallway. Emma and Alex dismissed it as other guests moving about, but the noises grew louder and more persistent. Around midnight, Emma woke to a cold draft and saw the curtains fluttering, despite the windows being closed. She nudged Alex awake. "Do you hear that?" Alex listened, his eyes widening. The whispers had grown louder, more distinct. They seemed to be coming from directly outside their room. He got up to investigate, opening the door cautiously. The hallway was empty, but the whispers continued, now seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Alex closed the door and locked it, his unease palpable. "Let's try to sleep," Emma suggested, though she doubted they would get any rest. They lay back down, but the noises persisted, accompanied by the occasional creak of the floorboards and the rustling of unseen entities. Emma's anxiety grew, and she reached for Alex's hand. Suddenly, the room's temperature plummeted, and a thick fog began to seep in from under the door. Emma's breath came in short gasps as she saw a shadowy figure materialize in the corner of the room. It was the woman from the roadside, her hollow eyes fixed on them. "You shouldn't have come here," she whispered, her voice sending chills down their spines. Emma and Alex clung to each other, paralyzed with fear. The figure moved closer, her presence overwhelming. Just as she reached the foot of the bed, the door burst open, and Mrs. Turner rushed in, holding a candle. "Be gone," she commanded, her voice firm and unyielding. The figure recoiled, then vanished, the room returning to its normal temperature. Emma and Alex stared at Mrs. Turner, who looked pale, determined. "I'm so sorry," Mrs. Turner said, her voice trembling. "I should have warned you. This place. It's haunted by the spirits of those who died on the nearby road. They seek out travelers, drawn to their energy." Emma and Alex exchanged a glance, the horror of the situation sinking in. "We need to leave," Alex said, his voice shaking. Mrs. Turner nodded. "I'll help you pack. You can stay in my house for the night. It's protected." They quickly gathered their belongings and followed Mrs. Turner to her house, a modest but cozy home just behind the motel. As they settled into the guest room, Emma couldn't help but wonder what other secrets this seemingly idyllic town held. The next morning, Emma and Alex thanked Mrs. Turner and decided to leave the town immediately. They drove in silence, both lost in thought about the previous night's events. The road ahead seemed less inviting now, each twist and turn filled with potential danger. Determined to find the answers, Emma suggested they visit the local library in the next town to research the haunted motel and the road where they had picked up the ghostly hitchhiker. At the library, they found old newspapers and records detailing numerous accidents and disappearances on that stretch of road. The motel itself had a dark history, with several guests reporting paranormal experiences similar to theirs. One article caught Emma's eye. It mentioned a ritual that had been performed decades ago by the town's elders to keep the spirits at bay. The ritual had been abandoned over the years, leading to the resurgence of ghostly activity. Emma showed the article to Alex, her mind racing. What if we perform the ritual? Maybe it will help put the spirits to rest. Alex hesitated but nodded. It's worth a try. We need to find out what the ritual entails. The article provided some details, but they needed more information. They approached the librarian, an elderly man named Mr. Harris, who seemed knowledgeable about the town's history. Mr. Harris listened to their story and nodded gravely. The ritual requires certain items and must be performed at the stroke of midnight. You must gather sage, a silver coin, and a vial of holy water. The ritual site is an old stone circle in the forest, near where you encountered the woman. Emma and Alex gathered the necessary items and prepared for the ritual. As midnight approached, they drove back to the forest, their hearts pounding with anticipation and fear. They reached the stone circle, its ancient stones standing silent and imposing in the moonlight. Emma lit the sage, its fragrant smoke swirling around them, and placed the silver coin in the center of the circle. Alex carefully poured the holy water over the coin. Together, they recited the incantation from the article, their voices steady despite their fear. The air grew still, and for a moment, it seemed as though nothing would happen. Then, a powerful gust of wind swept through the circle, extinguishing the sage and sending chills down their spines. The air around them seemed to shimmer, and the ghostly figure of the woman appeared once more. "Why have you come?" she asked, her voice a haunting echo. Emma stepped forward, her fear replaced by determination. "We want to help you. We want to put you to rest." The woman's hollow eyes softened, and for the first time, she seemed almost human. "Thank you," she whispered. "I have been trapped here for so long. I died in an accident on that road, and my spirit has been bound by anger and sorrow." Emma and Alex exchanged a glance, their resolve strengthening. They completed the ritual, chanting the final words with conviction. A bright light enveloped the circle, and the woman's figure began to dissolve. "Be at peace," Emma said softly. The woman smiled, a look of relief washing over her face. As her spirit dissipated, the oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the forest seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Emma and Alex stood in silence, the weight of their experience settling over them. They had faced their fears and helped a tormented soul find peace. It was a journey they would never forget. As they drove away from the forest, the road ahead seemed less foreboding. Their bond had grown stronger, forged in the crucible of their shared ordeal. They knew their adventures were far from over, but they were ready to face whatever came their way, together. Emma and Alex continued their travels, each new destination a testament to their courage and resilience. They shared their story with fellow travelers, spreading a message of hope and the importance of confronting the unknown. Their journey had changed them, imbuing them with a deeper understanding of the world and the mysteries it held. They had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, their love for each other a guiding light through the shadows. The road ahead was long and winding, filled with countless adventures and untold stories. And as they drove into the horizon, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, ready to uncover the secrets of the world and the spirits that walked among them. The Roadside Encounter. The Thompson family had been planning their summer vacation for months. John and Linda, along with their 18-year-old daughter, Sarah, and their younger son, Jake, were excited for a week-long road trip across America. They had mapped out their route meticulously, choosing scenic highways and quaint towns to explore. One evening, as they drove along a remote, winding road through the mountains, the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the asphalt. The road was empty, with dense forest on either side, giving it an eerie, isolated feel. "Dad, are we almost there?" Jake asked from the back seat, his voice tinged with impatience. "Almost, buddy," John replied, glancing at the map. "Just another hour or so." As they rounded a bend, the headlights caught a figure standing by the roadside. It was a young woman, her long hair flowing in the wind, her white dress illuminated in the fading light. She raised her hand in a silent plea for help. "Should we stop?" Linda asked, her voice uncertain. Sarah, feeling a pang of empathy, urged we should help her. "It's getting dark, and she looks lost." John hesitated, feeling a chill run down his spine. "I don't think it's safe. We don't know who she is or what she wants. Let's keep going." Despite her reservations, Sarah agreed, and they continued driving, leaving the figure standing alone on the roadside. But as they drove away, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. As the night wore on, strange occurrences began to plague the Thompson family. The car's radio would turn on and off by itself, static filling the silence. The temperature inside the vehicle dropped, and the air grew thick with an oppressive feeling. "Dad, do you feel that?" Sarah asked, rubbing her arms to ward off the sudden chill. John nodded, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. "I do. Something doesn't feel right." Suddenly, Jake let out a startled cry. "Did you see that?" There was a face in the window. Everyone turned to look, but there was nothing there. Linda tried to comfort Jake, but the atmosphere in the car grew increasingly tense. A few miles down the road, they passed a dilapidated house, its windows dark and empty. As they drove by, the figure of the young woman appeared in the rearview mirror, standing on the porch, her hollow eyes following them. "She's back," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. John accelerated, hoping to put as much distance as possible between them and the apparition. But the further they drove, the stronger the feeling of being watched became. Shadows flitted at the edge of their vision, and whispers filled the car, too faint to understand but impossible to ignore. Finally, they reached their destination, a small, cozy and nestled in a quiet town. Exhausted and on edge, the family hurried inside, hoping for a restful night. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned, her mind replaying the eerie events of the journey. Around midnight, she heard a faint tapping on the window. Sitting up, she saw the same young woman standing outside, her expression one of sorrow and despair. Sarah's scream woke her parents, and Jake, John rushed to Sarah's room, finding her pale and trembling. "What's wrong? She's here," Sarah stammered, pointing to the window. John checked the window, but there was no sign of anyone. It must have been a nightmare. Try to get some sleep. The next day, the family tried to enjoy their vacation, but the haunting presence followed them. They heard whispers in the halls, doors would open and close on their own, and objects moved inexplicably. Sarah felt a constant chill, as if someone was always watching her. Linda decided to visit the local library to find out more about the apparition. The librarian, an elderly woman named Mrs. Avery, listened to Linda's story and nodded knowingly. There's a legend about a young woman named Emily who died in a car accident on that road many years ago, Mrs. Avery explained. Her spirit is said to haunt travelers who ignore her pleas for help. She attaches herself to them, seeking acknowledgement and understanding. Linda returned to the inn, her face pale. We need to find a way to help Emily move on. We can't keep living like this. That night, Sarah decided to confront Emily. She waited until midnight, when the tapping on the window began again. This time, she opened the window and stepped outside. Emily, why are you doing this? Sarah asked, her voice steady despite her fear. Emily's ghostly figure appeared, her expression one of sorrow and despair. I can't find peace. I'm trapped in this world, unable to move on. Sarah took a deep breath. How can we help you? Emily's eyes filled with tears. I need closure. My family never knew what happened to me. They need to know I'm at peace. Sarah nodded. We'll help you, I promise. The next day, the Thompsons visited the local cemetery and found Emily's grave. They contacted the town's historical society and managed to locate Emily's surviving relatives. With their help, they arranged a memorial service, providing the closure Emily's spirit needed. As the service concluded, Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. That night, Emily appeared one last time, her expression serene. Thank you, she whispered. I can finally rest. With those words, Emily's spirit faded, leaving the Thompsons with a profound sense of relief. Their vacation resumed, free from the haunting presence that had followed them. The experience had changed them, deepening their bond as a family and teaching them the power of compassion and understanding. As they continued their journey, they carried Emily's memory with them, a reminder of the mysteries and wonders that lay hidden along the roads less traveled.
Thank you for joining us on this journey into the heart of darkness. If you enjoyed this tale, please like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more chilling stories of the unknown.